Lower throttle up.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Discovery's 4 computers now have primary control of critical vehicle functions.
Roger, 0G, and I feel fine.
Welcome to Fort Worth Esoteric Masonic Podcast, where we wade into the deep end of the pool for the more spiritually minded Mason.
Nice to be in orbit.
The statements of our guest and host do not represent the stance of any lodge or Grand Lodge.
Welcome back to the Fort Worth Masonic Podcast, dear listeners. My name is Gabriel Jagush, and I am the Worshipful Master of Fort Worth Lodge.
I am Billy Hamilton. I am a past master and current Tyler of Fort Worth 148 Lodge.
And for this episode, we have a very special guest.
Chris Earnshaw speaking here from Japan.
Oh, fantastic. It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast, Right Worshipful Brother Earnshaw. And we are excited to dig into your career and the books you've written, and kind of explore a very different side of Masonry than most of our listeners are used to seeing and witnessing and understanding.
Okay.
Billy, if you want to go ahead and get us kicked off on the personal questions.
Absolutely. So, Right Worshipful Brother Earnshaw, as Gabriel said, it's a pleasure to have you here. I know I stumbled across your books on Amazon.com when I was looking at Masonic books. And so we've looked through some of your Masonic background, but if you would tell us a little bit about yourself outside of the Masonic lens, who are you as a person, and what's your background?
So my background is I've been in Japan now some 40 years, and I came here after high school as a kind of adventure. Before going to university. In England, universities recommend that high school students, before joining university, take a 1-year holiday, what we call a gap year, which is to kind of release all that pent-up energy and all the stress of exams and things, go to Africa and work with Médecins Sans Frontières or someone like that, get a bit of experience, and then come back to university. And I came to Japan for my gap year, and I decided not to go back to university. I stayed here. I've been mainly in the pharmaceutical industry. The company I first worked for was the Wellcome Foundation. It's now part of GSK, GlaxoSmithKline, and they hired me because I spoke Japanese. And they said it was easier to teach someone medicine than it is to teach a doctor Japanese, but I'm not sure about that. So they sent me back to Japan. I was working in Japan for many years before I was scouted by Merck Sharp Dome, and worked for them for a few years. I went into banking, and finally I'm now the CEO of a small startup called Tesla Pharmaceuticals.
Wow, that is a very adventurous and unpredictable career. I saw on your biography on your website that one of the things that you did when you were in Japan, the very beginning of your tenure in Japan, you changed your mind about what you were planning to study, and you decided then to study calligraphy at Daito Bunko University, and I probably said that wrong.
No, that's perfect.
And you are also qualified as a professor of calligraphy. So that stuck out to me. What is what is it about a Japanese calligraphy that grabbed your interest so powerfully and led you to pursue it that deeply?
Well, it's a little bit strange. I was studying the Japanese language at what they call a cultural center. And at the cultural center, they were also teaching calligraphy. But I thought that it was teaching people how to write the language, the ABCs of Japanese. And so I signed up for the language and then soon found out it wasn't so much about how to write, but how to write it in an attractive manner. And so it was more of an art form than just the simple ABCs. And so, I found that was very interesting because you're only working in two colors, black and white. And how you make that attractive and appealing depends on how the brush interacts with the paper. And of course, some of the paintings that I did, the calligraphy I did, was sometimes 4 foot by 4 foot. Sometimes I've done larger works. There's one in the Tokyo Masonic Center, which is about 6 foot wide by about 5 foot tall. So there's all sorts of opportunities for practicing calligraphy.
That's fantastic. This is more out of personal curiosity. How does your technique have to change when you reach such large canvas sizes?
Yes, so there are different forms of writing Chinese characters. So the Japanese adopted Chinese characters some nearly 1,500 years ago, and before that they had their own scripts. But they basically took the Chinese characters, and the Chinese characters are normally written in 5 different formats. The same word can be written 5 different ways. So a very fluid way, a very formal way, a very rigid way, and then there's also the Japanese script, which is called kana, hiragana kana, and so you have normally 6 different ways of writing the same one word. And so then when you're doing a large canvas, you want appeal. So normally you try and choose characters that are interesting. For me, I look at it as the way the Chinese characters are composed. So to me, it's more like architecture. Whereas the Japanese, immediately, they see the meaning of the word. For me, the meaning is kind of secondary. And so I was lucky to study with some very famous calligraphers in Japan, and I even published a book on Japanese calligraphy for foreigners in English. So yeah.
I really like that. That's cool. So in your career, you have you've studied calligraphy, you have studied Japanese, you were a professional analyst, you did marketing for pharmaceuticals, you got a PhD in neuroscience, you studied the culinary arts, and you're working on the cello, and you're also a member of a Tao temple. Out of all this whirlwind of studying, what was it there that led you to Freemasonry?
So I've been a Freemason for 38 years. So probably 3 years after I came to Japan, I applied. My family are all Freemasons, and so I was aware of Freemasonry. But it was kind of cloudy. Nobody really talked about it. So, my father, I believe my great-grandfather was a member of the Grand Lodge of England. I'm not sure exactly what position he held. But my grandfather was a very strong influence, and he, also, there's this one story I talk about in one of my books, just briefly. My grandfather was ill and he was staying with us so he could look after him. And one night there was a ring at the front door and I went and opened it, and it was the Speaker of the House of Commons. In England, that's the equivalent of like Nancy Pelosi coming to your doorstep. And I wasn't expecting it. I knew the person's name. I'd seen them on television. I just couldn't think. So I couldn't remember the name. I knew the face. And he came to see how my grandfather was doing. And so I was really surprised. And so that had a strong effect upon me, that somebody, so elevated as the Speaker of the House of Commons could find the time to come and see my grandfather. But they were in the same lodge. And so that's had a really strong effect upon me. And when I had the opportunity, I applied in Japan.
That's a wonderful illustration of the connections that Freemasonry can bring us. I love that. So am I correct in understanding then that your very first dive into Freemasonry was directly into the Grand Lodge of Japan's jurisdiction, and that you joined a Japanese lodge?
No, I joined an English lodge based in Kobe under the Grand Lodge of England.
Ah, okay. So this is one of those provincial Grand Lodges then?
Yes. So what happened was, until about 1957, Japan was an open region. It didn't have its own Grand Lodge. So we had about 5 Grand Lodges already had lodges here. We had the Grand Lodge of Scotland, England, Massachusetts, the Philippines, and Prince Hall were already operating lodges here. And then some of the Philippine lodges, I think 5 of them, got together and applied to be a Grand Lodge of Japan. And so they had to get permission from the Grand Lodges of the Philippines to leave one jurisdiction and set up their own jurisdiction. And since 1957, no other lodges were able to be open, except Grand Lodge of Japan lodges.
Interesting. Okay, because I did see in your bio you were past master of 6 different lodges in 3 different jurisdictions.
Oh, wow.
I'm sorry, you were a past master 6 times, so I'm not sure if it's from different lodges or if it was multiple times.
Right. Yes. Yes. Correct. So I've been 3 different lodges. So Synonym Lodge was under the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts. And also Harmony Lodge was under the Grand Lodge of Japan, and the Research Lodge, I was master 3 times in the Grand Lodge of Japan's Research Lodge. Yes.
Very cool. Okay. So I do have to ask, just for a personal question, because I'm currently senior warden of the Texas Lodge of Research.
Yes.
What stuck out in your experience as master of a research lodge?
I think because our research lodge is quite young, it's only about 35 years old. And it seems that people come to learn something, but they're not really willing to present papers at the lodge. So it becomes the burden of the master of the lodge to prepare a paper each time. And so we would meet every month, including during summer. And so that meant every year I had to write 12 papers. And over 3 years, that became 33 papers. And then I got permission from the Grand Master to put all 33 papers, to combine them into a single book. And I got permission to translate and publish that, and that became my books, Spiritual Freemasonry.
Oh, wow. Okay. So the 4 books you have in that series are directly related to your experience in the Lodge of Research there under the Grand Lodge of Japan.
Yes, correct.
Okay. All right. Now, in the Grand Lodge of Japan, I guess I was wondering, what offices have you held at the Grand Lodge level?
So I've only been the grand historian.
Okay. Yeah, and I noticed in the front of your book, it actually had an acknowledgement there, I guess, from the Grand Master of Japan when it was written.
Yes.
So that was.
In Japan, we're not allowed to write things about Freemasonry without the Grand Lodge, the Grand Master's permission, and so it just stops people, I know, promoting their own agenda or whatever. And so, yeah, that's correct.
Well, that makes sense.
That introduction I used, it was actually the front is right at the beginning. It's let's see if I can find it. It's the sanction was taken from a book by Preston, and so I used exactly the same format and wording from Preston's book, which was written in 1730, Masonry Dissected.
Yep, that's a classic right there.
That's it.
Yeah, Preston's lectures are what inspired Thomas Smith Webb to rewrite Masonic ritual, and are, as a consequence, are indirectly the source of pretty much all modern American Masonic ritual, with the exception of the state of Pennsylvania and a few lodges here and there that use Scottish Rite ritual. So you touched kind of on one of our main central themes of this episode, which is the series of papers that you turned into a series of 4 books called Spiritual Freemasonry. And you said there's one has to do with the initiation and the beginning of enlightenment. One has to do with alchemy. One has to do with pursuing immortality, and the fourth one, Royal Arch, you said has to do with the Chinese influence on Masonry. If you could kind of give us a walkthrough of these books and the themes that they explore, and we'd love to hear your thoughts about the spiritual aspects of Freemasonry, and broadly speaking, and then more specifically your findings on the Chinese influence on Freemasonry.
Okay, fine. Yes. So the books are, as you mentioned, the first book is about the first. It's the one for each degree, and so the first degree is Freemasonry Initiation by Light, and I found I was visiting Taiwan. I studied Chinese at university, Chinese literature, and I was invited to a lecture at Taiwan, so I went there, and they were having an initiation at a temple, so I joined in with them. It's a very simple thing, and then I realized that the initiation in this Taoist temple was nearly exactly the same as a first degree initiation, and so this got me to write the book about how this could be, whether the Chinese copied the Freemasons or the Freemasons copied the Chinese, or what. And having looked at the history, then I realized that obviously the Freemasons had copied the Chinese. And when I looked at some of the history, I realized that there was a boom in Chinese things in England at the time. So we had, for example, there was kind of 3 waves of things going through. The first wave started about 1600 with the beginning of importing things, tea and silk. And then later we got furniture and wallpaper. And then about the 1700s, we even had gardens, just garden designs were based on Chinese, and even houses were designed like that. And so they had a name for this. It was called chinoiserie, and it was a particular design of furniture and things like this. And so what happened was that the King George the III, decorated Buckingham Palace and also his son, the Prince of Wales. He had a palace at Carlton House. They were decorated in Chinese style inside. And then the Prince of Wales, who became King George IV, he built himself a retreat down at Brighton called Brighton Pavilion. And outside it's all kind of Gothic Indian, but inside it's all Chinese. And so this is the original, what we call influencers, because when royalty does something, then the aristocracy will start to copy, and then rich people copy the aristocrats, and it's filtered all the way through. And so this interest in Chinese things continued until about 1830, 1840, and then the Opium Wars between England and China, and then all exports to England stopped. And so that was kind of sad. But a lot of expats who were based in China at the end of the Victorian era, so the 1890s, many of them thought, and they were Freemasons, and they thought that the Chinese secret societies who were based in 1644, the Ming Empire had collapsed, and then there was this groundswell to stop foreigners coming in from northern China, the Manchurians, and to stop them taking over the country. And these secret societies were called Tiandihui, and they were trying to protect the emperor, etc. And they have rituals very similar to Freemasons. Their temples are run by three brothers. They have to light candles before and after anything's done, because no spiritual work can take place unless the candles are written. They had secret signs, secret words, all sorts of things. And it's just so, I talk about it in great depth in this book. I think I found 17 correspondences that were exact match for the Chinese and the Chinese ritual, and then Freemason. And that's what I wrote about in Initiation by Light. Then the second degree I saw as being much more alchemical. And so I talked about the alchemy of the day and what the idea of alchemy.
Gabriel, are you still there? Hello?
Hey, sorry about that. I was muted.
Okay. I think we may have lost him.
Hello?
There we
Okay,
go.
there you are.
Oh, perfect. When our signal, right before our signal cut out, you were talking about the alchemical nature of the second degree.
Oh, okay, fine, thank you. Yes, so I noticed there were some words in the degree that didn't really make sense. And one of them was saying that Pythagoras had discovered something, and he exclaimed, Eureka. Well, I studied Latin at school, and I know it wasn't Pythagoras, but it was Archimedes that said Eureka. And so it got me to thinking that there was other hints or something hidden in the ritual. And when I started taking it apart, then I found more and more alchemical references. And so that got me to write the book about Freemasonry, spiritual alchemy. And so by the 1700s, people were not interested in making gold out of lead. They realized it was nearly impossible. They can do it nowadays with some kind of atomic manipulation, but in the old days they didn't have the technology that we have nowadays. So that book about spiritual alchemy was showing how the individual could change himself to become a more spiritual person by following the ritual in the second degree. The third degree talks about, third degree of the book is called, saying Freemasonry, Quest for Immortality. And in the third degree, there are about 5 references to immortality. And I'm wondering why it was kind of like over the top. Why do we talk about immortality so much? And it comes down to the fact that in the late 1690s to about 1720, there was many people who were challenging the church's idea about the afterlife. And so it was, how do I say? Yes. So at the time, Freemasonry was thought to be a kind of deist, not Christian per se, but more deist, and meaning that God has created a being, and then he has left the control of what happens to these beings to the individual. And so this was challenged by the church. And so, but many people believed that Freemasonry had some sort of hidden agenda, I suppose it would be. One of the persons who was Henry Layton, he wrote a book saying that the soul did not exist. And at the time, the laws about blasphemy were a little bit grey. And so then the book was debated by Parliament. It was found to be blasphemous. And then it was burned by the public hangman, which actually only increased its interest among people. Wanted to know why it was why the book was pointed out or focused on by Parliament. Anyway, so this idea about immortality, which is then continued in my last book, which is Freemasonry Royal Arch. It looks at Royal Arch because Royal Arch is in both in Blue Lodge, but it's also the first degree in Scottish Rite, and again in York Rite. So why does it have this central position in all 3 degrees? It's kind of challenged me why, and I looked at it, and York Rite, Scottish Rite, in fact, the degree is slightly different. You know, the main characters, the names are different, and details are slightly different. But anyway, and but then finally I go back and look at the Chinese connection and what these 3 degrees, first, second, and third degree, were actually trying to achieve. And it's a kind of spiritual experience where the individual realizes he's an immortal, but he doesn't experience death. And that is kind of important. And it's really quite exciting when you think of that in those terms. But if you want to get the story without reading all 4, the first and the 4th books, they cover this Chinese connection to Freemasonry. Yes.
Wow, that is a great summary of the book series. It has definitely kind of clarified the scope of work for them and for me. Now, when you talk about these Chinese secret societies that share similarities with early Freemasonry, when you talk about the Taoist temple initiation that shares many similarities with the entered apprentice degree, where I guess it's the broad spectrum questions of the 5 8, the 5 W's and the 1 H, but kind of where and when and how are we, if we're traveling back in time, what year and what location do we want to go to start seeing this cross-pollination? Was this something that as you mentioned, the British expats were there? Is this something that they brought back with them, or that this was something that was brought to Britain with the exports from China? And kind of how did that start coagulating into a more formalized thought system like Freemasonry.
That's interesting because, if you go way back to something like 1000 BC, what we call the Zhou dynasty, at that time there were no emperors in China. They were basically kings, and they all owned, there were dozens of countries, and it all formed major China, but they didn't identify as a single country. And in the Zhou dynasty, the king was supported by 3 top officials, and the names were the Grand Protector, the Grand Tutor, but the most senior of all was known as the Grand Master. And I don't know if this is where the idea came from, because something like 3,000 years later, in 1813, when the Grand Lodge of the Moderns and the Grand Lodge of the Ancients combined, then you had King George IV, and you had the Grand Master. But obviously he wasn't a government official, but he was the brother of the king. So it was the younger brother of the king was the Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of England. No, it's just an interesting thing. But the way it actually happened, I believe, is that sometime around 1689, I believe it was, a senior official from the Chinese Ming dynasty, and the Ming dynasty had collapsed in 1644, but because China is such a big country, it took them another something like 40 years to actually to implement the new government from the Manchu government. So at that time, then the Ming dynasty was in hiding. It was first in the south of the country, and then it went to Taiwan and various places, and until the emperor was actually he was imprisoned or assassinated, then he still had a right to be called an emperor. And so that transition took some 40 years. So one of the members of his forget the word in English. I speak Japanese all the time and I forget the English. So one of the members of his government left to at the time there were a lot of Jesuits who were government advisors, and they were bringing ideas from the West about astronomy, astrology, and various things. And they were, at the same time, they were taking Chinese texts, translating them into Latin for publication in Europe. And one of the senior government officials, his name is Xiong Fuzhong, wanted to become a priest, and he had to go to the Vatican to be made a priest. And so he traveled all the way to Europe. He stopped in England for 2 years, and he was a guest at the Bodleian Library at the University of Oxford. And the senior librarian there was Thomas Hyde. Thomas Hyde was the senior expert on Arabic and several other languages, and he studied with Mr. Shen from China. And Shen, he studied Chinese, and he helped the government in an official capacity. So he was actually able to meet with King James II at his palace when they needed an official translator. So he was also a professor at Oxford University, professor of Arabic, later professor of Chinese, and he was also the senior librarian. Librarian doesn't sound such a great role to have, but in those days, the Bodleian Library was probably the most advanced library in the world at the time. So together they studied all these Chinese things, and I believe this is how that Hyde learnt about the Taoist ritual that I had attended in Taiwan. It'd been the same for 2,500 years. Nothing had changed. This idea of bringing light to the east to the candidate is just one step in the initiation in the Taoist temple. And so I think that Mr. Shen Fuzhong, told him about this. And we know because there are letters at the British Museum between the two of them, and they're talking about certain terms, talking about Taoist incantations and things like this, and talking about the I Ching, also Tao Te Ching, which is these two books are the central core of Taoism in China since the year dot. So this I Ching and the Tao Te Ching. And so he was teaching this to Thomas Hyde. Now, Thomas Hyde was a friend of Isaac Newton. And Isaac Newton's secretary was John de Sagoulier, who was the third Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of England. Well, actually, at the time it was the Premier Grand Lodge, but later became the Grand Lodge of England. So Newton, he worked at the Exchequer. It was what you would call the Treasury Department. We call it Her Majesty's HM Exchequer. Inside that was the mint, where they printed money and coins and things, and Newton was in charge of that. And in the next department was George Payne, who was the second Grand Master. So it seems that all the people who, not like a puzzle, the people who had the information knew each other. And so the information from Shen went to Thomas Hyde. Hyde told Newton. Newton told John de Sagoulier, George Payne. And Newton also was I don't know if the word's correct, but a closet alchemist. He seriously studied alchemy. And the first Grand Master, Anthony Sayre, was reputed to be an alchemist. So it seems our first three Grand Masters all knew Newton really well. I mean, he worked with him. So, and Newton was John de Sagoulier's daughter. When his daughter was born, Newton was the godfather to John de Sagoulier's daughter. I mean, that's how close they were. So it seems to me that what happened was these three people, Anthony Sayre, George Payne, John de Sagoulier, received this information indirectly from Hyde, and they thought that operative masonry would be the ideal structure to teach this new Taoist teaching. Now, it's not just in the Premier Grand Lodge, but we noticed that in the Grand Lodge of the Ancients, they started introducing other types of rituals. So you had several, a kind of base ritual, which probably, if you read the Edinburgh Register House ritual, it was written in something like, I forget the date, 1890. It was a 1 degree ritual, perhaps 2 degree, but mainly 1 degree ritual. And this is what the operative Masons were using. And it's quite different from the early ritual that the Grand Lodge of the Premier Grand Lodge was introduced. 1717, they rewrote the degrees. And then in 1725, they introduced a 3rd degree. And the reason there had to be a 3rd degree is because that alchemy is a 3-step process, and you need a 3rd degree to complete the process of alchemy. So that's how I feel. Oh, sorry, yes. And then the Grand Lodge of the Ancients started writing new degrees, and they introduced, for example, I'm thinking off the top of my head. The Irish master's degree. The Irish master's degree is interesting because it's got some Chinese words in the degree. One is the secret password, but it's also some directions like stand up, sit down, things like this. And there are at least 4 other degrees like this, that it's the Irish master, the Scots master, and then the ELU of the 15, I think it is. And they all have these Chinese words in the degrees. My feeling is that they knew that the Grand Lodge of the Premier Grand Lodge had introduced Chinese, but they didn't know exactly what it was. And they wanted to attract a better class of member to their lodges. So they started writing degrees with Chinese words. A bit complicated answer, but that was a complicated time.
I guess it was very much the Wild West of Freemasonry back then. You've kind of touched on a lot of the liturgical similarities between, I guess, these Chinese rituals and these Taoist rituals. So we know, okay, hey, liturgically these share a lot of similarities in ritual. To what extent, and what are some good examples, if so, do you feel that the Chinese philosophy and Taoist philosophy was infused into Masonic teachings? Because we've talked about I guess, the mechanical similarity of them, and now I'm kind of wondering about the intellectual similarity thereof.
Yes, so this is another thread that I kind of followed. The Royal Society was set up in 1660, and one of the things they started to do, at the beginning, they didn't have a very strong direction. It was a little bit amateurish, but one of the things they were looking for is a universal language, and a language that existed before all other languages, probably 2,000-3,000 years ago. And some people thought it was Hebrew, and the other people thought it was Chinese. Why they thought it was Chinese, I don't know, but it was kind of the flavor of the time. And so people like John Dee, who was he was an alchemist, among other things, but he was a confidant of Queen Elizabeth I. And they felt that there was a way of combining not just the languages, but all the religions had a universal starting point. And it's what John Dee called Priscia Theologica. And for example, Gottfried Leibniz in Germany, he was looking for the same thing, and he called it the universal church. And so what they were looking for is some way to join the core elements of religion. And one of the things was to stop all the fight, because there'd been wars in Europe for so long. The Protestants and the Catholics had been fighting for 40 years, from 1618. And then we had the Civil War, then we had the Dutch Wars, the War of Spanish Succession. It just goes on and on. So, and of course we had the Jacobites as well, which is another issue. but anyway, so I think the members of the Royal Society were looking to see if we could combine all these belief systems in a single religion and call it the universal church or whatever. And many people looked at Chinese Taoism, and they saw it as a form of meritocracy, that it wasn't based on superstition or ancient stories about an angry god and things like this. It was based on how to live a good life. And they thought there was an opportunity to combine Christianity and Confucianism or Taoism together. And this is one of the things that people were looking at. The second thing is that other people were looking to join Judaism and Christianity. And so this is what we see in the lodge. If you look at the lodge, the Blue Lodge layout, it's based on the Tree of Life. And the 3 positions, so there are 10 Sephirot on the Tree of Life, but when we look at the lodge, there are only 7 of these Sephirot are occupied by officers of the lodge. 3 of them are not. These 3 are particularly important in the Hiramic legend. And because there's nobody sitting in the position where the Sephirot is, it kind of emphasizes this, the Tree of Life, and trying to combine it with a Christian, so-called Christian ritual of Freemasonry. Other people were doing it because of in 1666, the Great Fire of London happened, and the older part of London was burnt to the ground, and people put in new street plans, and one of them was the Tree of Life. And so they were suggesting that the new London would be built on the format of the Tree of Life. At the same time, when the Grand Fire happened, St. Paul's Cathedral also burnt to the ground, and the new St. Paul's Cathedral was also designed on the Tree of Life. Even though it's a Christian church, vertically, the Tree of Life can be seen in the vertical structure of the building. So all these kind of ideas of bringing religions together, bringing countries together, it was a very fruitful time, I think, in those days.
So it seems like there was a very large shift in perspective because of all of this. That's super neat to think about, and how modern Freemasonry would look like without all of this stuff. I mean, it would be a very different sort of practice. Now, you mentioned the I Ching and the Tao I Ching.
Tao Te Ching, yes.
Tao Te Ching.
Yeah.
What aspects of those 2 books do you see reflected in Masonic practice?
So there are several. I have quotations in the book, but I'm trying to get off the top of my head. For example, the North Star, the star in the middle of the lodge, many people wonder what the star is, the blazing star. And could it be, like Venus, or could it be, I don't know, Jupiter or anything? But I believe it's actually the North Star. And the reason being is because Confucius said that anybody who exercises government by means of virtue may be compared to the North Star, because the North Star doesn't move, but all the other stars move around it and they all face towards. So it's like how the officers, you have the Bible, which represents the virtue, and all the officers sit in a circle around the Bible. And that is taken directly from the Tao Te Ching. So here and there are these references. In the oath, for example, we say that, no word, syllable, letter, or character should be written or engraved or painted or whatever. But the interesting thing is that no word, syllable, letter, or character. By character, what do they actually mean? We didn't have characters in those days. We have them nowadays because we use computers, and it includes characters, which are not letters. But in those days, there were only letters. So could they be suggesting that character was a Chinese character, because it's a Chinese word? There's here and there these kind of interesting quotes, but particularly in the Scots Master and the Irish Master degrees, we have Chinese words being used nearly perfectly. A little bit, the way it's written is a little bit not how we would write Chinese nowadays, but it sounds good. Yes.
So then they're actually using phonetic approximations of actual Chinese words then.
Yes,
it's not just correct. Like an ideal or anything. They're actually trying to pronounce it.
Yes. And wow. Often it's not first hand, it's second hand. But yes, that's correct. Wow. So, for example, in Taoism, when I went through the ritual to be initiated into a temple, the senior officer, his title is the light transmitting officer. That's his job. He brings the light from the east to the candidate. And the other two officers represent the sun and the moon. And they all have a candle, and they're represented. The three officers are represented by three candles. Well, this sounds very much to me like the three lesser lights: the sun, the moon, and the master. And so, this is maybe where they got the idea from.
Kind of touching on the idea of a universal religion. This is maybe perhaps beyond the Freemasonry specifically, and more towards a broader esoteric perspective. But you see here, the three lights there. You see the three officers. My understanding of the I Ching is that the characters are primarily composed of three bars that can be broken or unbroken to create a large combination of symbols. And then we have other stuff like the Vedic gods. There's three of the Vedic primary gods, and we have the Christian Trinity. Yes. We're kind of touching on this idea, perhaps, of a universal religion or some sort of greater truth. I guess that Jung would have described it something hidden within the universal unconscious. What do you think this repeating symbolism of the number 3 as found in ancient Eastern religions, ancient Western religion, Freemasonry, and other esoteric orders, what's that kind of pointing to for you?
Sorry, I talk about this in my last book, Freemasonry Royal Arch. It's to do with the Trinity and how the Trinity can actually be found inside the body of the self. So you have the body, the soul, and the spirit. And by utilizing these in a correct way, you're able to manifest things. And I think it's the secret of being able to manifest by correctly understanding the power given to us by our Creator. I think that's what many people in the Middle Ages were afraid of. And I give examples of people who were able to do wonderful things because I believe they understood how the Trinity could be used, not the Catholic or the Christian Trinity, but how the Trinity of inside the body could be used to manifest things. And we have examples of people who've just floated up into the they turned gravity upside down, and they were able to float through rooms and across gardens and things like this in front of large audiences. And so this created a problem for the Catholic Church, because many of these people who were doing these spiritual exercises were nuns and monks. And pictures and recordings and all sorts of things. So these are people who have been not able to become spiritual, but actually to change their change, what is it? The physics, I suppose, of how the body interacts with the world.
Making the mental actual, I suppose.
And of course, this is one of the advanced teachings of Taoism as well. So I believe that the Freemasons, it doesn't stop at the third degree saying, oh, this is, immortality, and the soul is immortal. It actually shows you how to do the next step, which is how to understand, to experience immortality without dying first. So the thing we have to remember is that Taoism isn't actually a religion. It's more like a way of life, a philosophy of life. And that's why it's so matches Freemasonry, because Freemasonry is not a religion either. So it's the connection seems to be very tight as far as I can see.
Now, for the second book that deals with the alchemical process, as outlined in the Fellowcraft degree, how do you feel the Fellowcraft degree best embodies the alchemical process, or perhaps maybe gives steps, or just describes the nature of alchemy in general?
Yes. So. There's so much symbolism in the degrees, and the symbolism represents things in Freemasonry. So, for example, alchemical things. For example, let me think. The phrase chalk, charcoal, and clay. These were used obviously to draw tracing boards on the floor, but they're also used in alchemy. And they represent mercury, sulfur, and salt, which are the tria prima of alchemy, the three prime elements of alchemy. Then there's the steps of 3, 5, 7 steps. Well, that again represents alchemy. The three is the tria prima, mercury, sulfur, and salt. 5 represents the colors that these three the chemicals change into. They change into white, black, red, or yellow and red. And then there's an intermediary color, which is called the peacock's tail, cauda pavonis, and it sometimes appears after the first or the second color. And then the 7 represents the 7 steps of alchemy. So you had things like separation, coagulation, precipitation, things like this. These are 7 different techniques. So in those days, because alchemy was so famous, people would recognize these steps. And when you get to the top of the 3 steps, then you're paid in wine and oil. The oil represents the dew of Hermon. So the dew of Hermon, or the oil of Hermon, who starts off as being blessed with oil on his forehead, and this oil drips down to the skirts of his garment. But halfway through, the oil is referred to as dew. Well, this is also referred to in many alchemical texts, that oil changes into dew, and dew is the thing that is used as the prima materia. So you had tria prima, which is the 3 prime elements, mercury, sulfur, and salt, but then you need a 4th to make it into gold or whatever you're trying to achieve, and that 4th thing was normally dew, and the dew had to be collected in the fields at a certain time of which is astrologically correct, and also first thing in the morning, and it was quite a palaver, quite hard work. And but these are all in the textbooks, and one of the symbols, which I don't think telling it here is going to excite anybody, but the square and compass is on the Bible in the center of the lodge. Of course, we mentioned that the blazing star is the center and everyone's focused on it. On top of the Bible, you have the square and compasses. You have the 2, John the Baptist and John the Evangelist, and they have rods, and these rods, if they cross over the square and cross over the compass, and now you have the seal of Solomon. And the seal of Solomon is a famous alchemical symbol for immortality and the philosopher's stone. And so again, this leads you onto something else. And so it's one thing after another. When you start looking at the degree, these things start to pop up.
Now, what do you feel, or actually, is there any crossover, or how do you feel there's crossover between the Taoism and Chinese mystic philosophy and alchemical practice? Because I've always kind of filed alchemy away under broadly European esoteric tradition of Arabic origin, which is kind of a very different sphere than Far Eastern mysticism. Do you feel that there's any crossover? And if so, what might that be?
The Arabs learned about alchemy from the Chinese. The Chinese were practicing alchemy around 200 BC. And they quickly realized that it was impossible to make gold from out of lead. And then they started focusing on an elixir of life, elixir of immortality. And this is their central goal. And of course, it was financed by the emperors. So the emperor of China, they all wanted to live as long as possible. And then they set up alchemical laboratories. They paid for the alchemists to try and find an elixir of immortality. And so this teaching came to, because the Arabs were on they were trading with India and India with China. And sometimes the Arabs went directly to China. So they soon understood or learnt about this elixir. In fact, it was Taoism at the time was the religion of the court. It wasn't the religion of the Mr. Joe Public. So it was a very elite, organized religion that so few people knew about. So it took time for the secrets to be released and people to find out. And so what happened was when the Arabs learned about it, it came into Europe in the 1300s. The alchemy divided into two paths. One was the monastic route, and they were looking at alchemy as a way of creating medicine. And I don't know if you know the herbal drink called Benedictine, but that was created using alchemy. It was a way to make the herbs less bitter for people to consume as medicine, etc. So these the Benedictine monks created the alcohol. But then the southern route came through Spain, and then people were still looking to see if they could make lead into gold. And it became a source of issue with the government, because they didn't want anybody to create gold, because then you could raise an army, you could overthrow the king or whatever. So they wanted to keep the money out of people's hands. And also, of course, the other thing was a lot of charlatans were taking money from people and pretending to make gold. So from the 1300s to nearly the 1700s, 400 years, people were still practicing this lead to gold transmutation, whereas the monastic route were making, then you've got people like Paracelsus and people like that who were using herbs instead of mercury, but they were using the same techniques as the alchemists were. So so I believe that that alchemy originally came from China, and there was actually a position in the government. The Grand Alchemist was actually a position in ancient China. Yeah.
That's amazing, actually. I didn't know that they had such a position.
Yes.
That is phenomenal. So then the subject of your third book is on seeking immortality and on achieving immortality. And in particular, you refer to a concept that you've described as experiencing or finding or achieving immortality without dying.
Yes.
What's kind of, in a nutshell, what are we looking at when we explore that concept?
So it's actually mostly introduced in the last book. It's to do with the ability of the body, of the spirit, to leave the body. And we now call it outer body experience, but in those days it was called astral projection or astral travel. And so there were many examples of this happening in religious literature. And so people were aware of it, but they probably didn't know much about it. But Taoism shows how you can do it. I mean, they give a technique for raising the energy in the body we call qi energy. And when the qi energy is particularly strong in the body, then the spirit is able to leave the body and go abroad. Abroad meaning anywhere. You can go anywhere you want to. You just have to focus on it, and you leave your body, and then after a while you come back and your body is still alive. That's it. So this would have been seen to have been at the time of the Enlightenment, they were interested in scientific studies. This would have been very exciting. However, for the church, this would have been very challenging. So yes, it was a little bit difficult times. Yes.
Well, and I could see how the church would find it as a challenge, because it would really be a direct challenge to their authority. But the concept actually of the out-of-body experience, I guess you can find in several different places a religious ritual, because you have Enoch being translated to heaven, in the vision of Ezekiel, the night journey of Muhammad.
Yes.
So there's several different places where I could see how that would be exciting to be able to have that direct experience, or to perhaps find a path toward that.
Well, we have, for example, in the Catholic Church, you have Joseph of Cupertino. He died in 1663, which is not so long, before the Freemasons. There are paintings of him floating through the sky, and he was made. I forget. He received something from the church by the Pope. Then St. Teresa Avila, she was also floating through the sky. I mean, there were just probably 10 or 12 people like this, but particularly in the Catholic Church, and so it was a little bit challenging. And so St. Francis of Assisi is another one who used to float. And there's the second thing about this is when your energy is so high, it attracts animals and birds to you. And this is one of the reasons that Francis of Assisi is known as being the saint of animals or something, because they were attracted to his high energy of his body. And but how he wasn't practicing a Chinese technique. I think what he was practicing, he was fasting, and he was doing intense prayer sessions and things like this. And I think then the body sometimes, I know I've had several experiences. I've been hospitalized and I've had out-of-body experiences. And I've seen doctors working on me, and so I know what it feels like. Yes, it's a very exciting experience.
Wow. Do you feel that the teachings of Freemasonry contain references to that still, or instructions for that, or retain any level of that concept?
There's very little, because in 1813, when the two Grand Lodges joined, I think that there was a lodge of promulgation and a lodge of reconciliation, and some of the wording was changed. because this is the time of Queen Victoria. The Victorians were very strong on morality, and so I think some of the wording may have been slightly changed to reflect a moral teaching. Of course, until 1812, we didn't wear black clothes in the lodge. We just normal clothes, and everybody was carrying a sword because that's what you did in those days. So in the Victorian times, we changed to wearing dark clothes and moral teachings. So to find this type of, I think you can find the Taoism. I found 27 references that are the same as the teachings of Taoism, and even the design of the lodge and things like this. But you'd have to know what you're looking for, I think. Yes, it's not overt at all.
Yeah, so that's really very deeply esoteric. Then
Yes.
you'd really have to work towards it.
Yes.
That's fascinating. Well, right, worshipful brother, I think we're kind of hitting our time limit as the time of our recording. It is starting to get into the late evening hours in Central Standard Time, and I'm sure that your lunch break over in Japan is coming to a close. This is something that I wish I had like 4 more hours to ask you all sorts of questions, because this is truly fascinating to me.
Thank you.
But we thank you so much for your time, and we really appreciate it. As part of our wrap up, would you like to leave any, any contact information or any website information, or maybe anything that you're working on for our listeners to hear about, so that they can learn where to find your work? And
I put my videos on YouTube under the title Spiritual Freemasonry, and I have a Twitter channel which is author.earnshaw. I make most of my announcements through that. I'm preparing another book for lodge education at the present time. So yes, I think one of the things that I like people to remember is that I talk about spiritual Freemason, and spirituality actually has nothing to do with religion, and that's kind of important thing to understand. Anyway, we could go on for hours, as you say.
That's fantastic. Well, right, worshipful brother, we appreciate you very much. Dear listeners, if you would like to learn more about right, worshipful brother Earnshaw's work, you can visit him on his Twitter, as he mentioned, or you can look up Spiritual Freemasonry on YouTube. You can learn more about Fort Worth Lodge at fortworth148.org or fortworthlodge.com. And our email is info148@fortworth148.org. You can learn more about our upcoming educational event in August called Texas Masonicon by visiting texasmasonicon.com. That's texasmasonicon.com if you're spelling it phonetically. This is Gabe Jagush signing off.
This is Billy Hamilton signing off.
Thank you and goodbye.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Discovery's 4 computers now have primary control of critical vehicle functions.
Roger, 0G, and I feel fine.
Nice to be in orbit.